A warning to citizens of Ontario and Canada. Bill 67, which purports to be nothing but an anti-racist bill, is in fact the most pernicious and dangerous piece of legislation that any Canadian government has attempted to put forward.
In December of last year, the NDP MPP for Kitchener Centre, Laura Belinda, tabled this bill, Bill 67, entitled An Act to Amend Various Acts with Respect to Racial Equity. And it's about infusing critical race theory into our education system, into our schools. But the most concerning part about the bill is it talks about fining people, and that's the language it uses, people. So students, teachers, parents, when it comes to subconscious racism. And they've actually changed the definition of racism in the bill to include subconscious racism. So, it's a very clear bill. It's a 6-page, simple bill, very clear. Probably the easiest one I've read in the 4 years that I've been in the Ontario legislature. And we saw, as you said, every single MPP that was present, PC, Liberal, NDP, and Independents, voted in favor of the bill. I was the only MPP to vote against it. Didn't understand why the other ones were voting in favor of it, especially our Conservative Party.
Dakota Christensen here for Rebel News. I live in the great Canadian province of Ontario, and I regret to inform you that critical race theory, in its most pernicious of forms, has arrived in Ontario, here to take up a permanent place in our province's schools from kindergarten all the way to post-secondary. It comes now to Ontario in the form of Bill 67, titled the Racial Equity in the Education System Act, which recently passed its second reading in Ontario's legislature. Every single member of provincial parliament in attendance from every party voted in favor of this bill. Well, that is, every MPP except for one. The lone holdout who stood against Bill 67 was Belinda of the New Blue Party of Ontario, who is the sitting MPP for the riding of Cambridge. I had the opportunity this past weekend to sit down with Belinda to hear her side as to why she voted against this bill and why she thinks that Bill 67 in fact poses a serious threat to racial equality in our schools. We here at Rebel News have launched a petition to fight back against the implementation of critical race theory in Ontario's schools at stopcrt.ca. Be sure to check out that site, sign our petition, and you can also send an email to Ontario MPPs calling on them to stop Bill 67, again at stopcrt.ca.
In December of last year, the NDP MPP for Kitchener Centre, Laura Belinda, tabled this bill, Bill 67, entitled An Act to Amend Various Acts with Respect to Racial Equity. And it's about infusing critical race theory into our education system, into our schools. But the most concerning part about the bill is it talks about fining people, and that's the language it uses, people. So students, teachers, parents, when it comes to subconscious racism. And they've actually changed the definition of racism in the bill to include subconscious racism. So, it's a very clear bill. It's a 6-page, simple bill, very clear. Probably the easiest one I've read in the 4 years that I've been in the Ontario legislature. And we saw, as you said, every single MPP that was present, PC, Liberal, NDP, and Independents, voted in favor of the bill. I was the only MPP to vote against it. Didn't understand why the other ones were voting in favor of it, especially our Conservative Party. And, I even was subjected to a little bit of chuckling from the government benches. One of the cabinet ministers thought it was funny that I stood up by myself to vote no against the bill. But upon reading it, and like I said, it's very simple, it's a very dangerous bill because, like I said, it allows you to fine people based on subconscious racism.
Mm-hmm. And so you talk about penalties here for subconscious racism. Does this also impact what children are being taught in schools and training and education? Like, does this change the way that things are actually being taught to children and teenagers and others in our system?
So they want to infuse different aspects to the learning. So it's interesting. So teachers will actually have to go through a re-education program if they are caught with subconscious racism. And the thing is, what's interesting about it is, it includes hiring it's new officers onto different levels of education, whether it's our public school board, the Ministry of Colleges, Training, Universities, the Higher Education Quality Council of Ontario. So you're hiring all these new left-wing, for lack of a better word, left-wing woke lobbyists onto this to push this agenda. And, who's responsible for, what subconscious racism is? So the bill is just, unfortunately, it's a big government bill that's just going to cost more money and does nothing to actually address racism.
Yeah, and so, to the point there, like you said, you were the only member of Ontario's parliament to vote against this. Every single other person of every party did it. I watched the actual feed of the vote. It was, I believe, 72 against just one, just you. Yeah. On the note there, only 72 MPPs were there to actually vote. 73, I guess, including yourself, were there out of, I believe the number is 124 actually sitting. So only 73 members of provincial parliament actually showed up to vote on this bill, which I think kind of speaks to the current state of Ontario's legislature. But also, you were the only voice of opposition, which I think is far too common these days, on this bill. And watching that video, I felt like it was like sort of this peer pressure mob mentality rule in our province's legislature, where everyone, did the same thing as the person standing next to them. They all stood up and were all proud to be part of the in crowd. You were the only person to stand up against this. Do you have anything to say about that, about sort of that peer pressure mob mentality that seems to be taking hold in our halls of power in Canada and in Ontario?
Well, first, I want to thank you for actually interviewing me about this, because it seems like a lot of intellectuals and advocacy groups have completely ignored the fact that I voted against this. But the mob mentality, I don't want to give them an out, because, some of the MPPs who are there, who have voted on this, have been there for over a decade. And like I said, this is a very simple bill. It's 6 pages. Someone with a grade 5 education could read it and understand it. And it's just what's happening. What we're seeing is the PC party is moving farther and farther left. And they're working together with the Liberals and the NDP, and they just keep all their policies, left-wing policies. And so the New Blue Party of Ontario, the party that I'm part of, we're the only true opposition in that legislature. And so I tend to be the only one voting no a lot of the times for things, because I read the bill, I understand it, and I'm saying, well, hang on. Like, no one's talking about or fighting for these issues. It was the carbon tax I was fighting against. I'm fighting against voter fraud. It's the taxpayer-funded subsidies that political parties are getting that all the parties voted in favor of, even though the PC party campaigned against it. And now all of a sudden they're getting $5 million from the taxpayer. Bill 12, the Marriage Code of Conduct from 2020, all things that I stood up against and blew the whistle on as a New Blue Party. And it was only then, after we say things, that everyone else piles on and says, well, hang on, yeah, actually, this is not a great idea. So I'm very much used to doing things on my own. If you remember July 2020, I was the only former or current PC MPP to vote against the Reopening Ontario Act. And I got punished for that. And, it's par for the course. I'm here to do a job, and I'm doing my job.
Well, I, for one, am very grateful to see that opposition, because it's so important in Canada. We have our federal government and, Parliament Hill, where all the federal MPs are sitting, and there's a lot of attention paid to federal politics, I find, in Canada. Yes. We often ignore the issues provincially, because it's our provincial parliaments that are in charge of the two major areas, would be healthcare and education, that are exclusively provincial issues when it comes to legislation. And that's often just kind of falls by the wayside when we're paying attention more to federal politics and otherwise. So issues like this in our schools, that's completely provincially. Mm-hmm. And, I find provincially a lot of conservative-minded people have sort of given up on provincial politics a lot. They're more focused on federal politics. And it does come down to just, I see you sitting there, and you're one of the only ones, if not the only one, who's actually in there debating and voting this. I just like to commend you for that, for one. But, coming back to the bill here itself, yesterday it caught my attention that Jordan Peterson, the very well-known, outspoken author, academic, clinical psychologist, he put out a video, essentially, I think it was just titled "Warning, Bill 67," and he called this something along the lines here of, he called it the most pernicious and dangerous piece of legislation that any Canadian government has attempted to put forward.
I'm going to read something that I wrote about this as a warning. A warning to citizens of Ontario and Canada. Bill 67, which purports to be nothing but an anti-racist bill, is in fact the most pernicious and dangerous piece of legislation that any Canadian government has attempted to put forward. And I hope I'm not saying that lightly. It will make mandatory the subversion of the entire education system in Ontario, K-12, as well as colleges and universities, to the radically leftist doctrines known as critical theory, a thoroughly anti-Western ideology, both postmodern and Marxist in its derivation, based on the idea that all our extant institutions are racist, sexist, and discriminatory in their essence.
That's a very bold statement, and his whole video is just going through talking about this bill and just how dangerous it is, from his perspective at least. But he didn't really put anything forward as to what we can do about this. He said it's very dangerous. He wanted to, put the issue out there, speak out from his platform, say, guys, this is really an issue. We need to pay attention to this. But I mean, from your perspective, as someone who has been in the legislature debating and voting against this bill, what can we do if we're concerned about people instilling critical race theory, which is such a buzzword now, but instilling these essentially racist and harmful, it's like weaponizing guilt and stoking racial divisions and pushing these ideologies on school children, go up to university level. This is something that I find very concerning myself and anyone who has children in our education system. So all that to say, what can we do if you're someone concerned about this bill, concerned about critical race theory in our schools and other harmful ideologies that are being pushed like this almost unanimously? What can we do to fight back? Because I know a lot of people feel pretty hopeless against this sort of thing that's, creeping into all of our institutions. What can we do?
So first, I just want to say with the Jordan Peterson podcast, it's interesting because it took 3 PhDs and 80 minutes to kind of delve into this bill. And let me tell you, that's not required. This is a very simple bill, as I mentioned before. And it seemed, again, I didn't watch the whole thing, but it seemed like they were trying to give the PCs an out. And Rick Nichols, he apologized for voting against it, trying to give these guys an out. There's no excuses. There's no excuses. A lot of these people have been here in Rick Nichols' case for a decade. And to say that you read the bill and didn't understand it, it was tabled in December. We voted in March. It's a 6-page, simple bill. If you have trouble understanding that, we have a bigger problem on our hands. But what we're seeing is people like Rick Nichols and other PC operatives and the PC party, they're all just going to the left. And what we need to do as Ontarians is you get behind people who are going to stand up for you. So like myself at the New Blue Party, but it's also making your voice heard. And so, when it came to Bill 12, for example, like I mentioned before, the New Blue Party put out a call to action, and Ontarians, they all contacted their MPPs. And sure enough, that bill failed. The PCs voted against that bill and it failed. And we need to continue doing that and let them know that this is unacceptable. The thing is, with a bill like this, people are nervous to speak up about it because they don't want to be labeled. I've had people contact me at the constituency office thanking me. I'm one of the few female MPPs who's recognized by the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists. I'm mixed. My dad's Trinidadian. And unfortunately, people said they felt safer that I voted against it because of that. And that's so sad. Like, it shouldn't matter about my ethnicity. It's something as simple as reading this legislation, this very simple legislation, and understanding that this is not something that should be introduced into our school system. And so I would encourage parents and just people in general to speak up about this and get in contact with your boards and with your MPPs and let them know to vote no against this bill if it gets through committee and comes to third reading.
If you believe that this twisted form of critical race theory and any such perversely racist ideologies have no place in our schools to be forced on our children, if you believe that no one should be singled out or taught to feel more less than anyone else due to the color of their skin, or punished for their subconscious ideas, then please go to stopcrt.ca and sign our petition. Bill 67 is a radically harmful piece of legislation cloaked behind the thin and misleading veil of racial equity, and it must be stopped. So please do sign and share our petition again at stopcrt.ca.